American buyers assume they've had a shot at every four-wheel drive worth owning. They haven't come close. Some of the toughest off-roaders on the planet were sold to millions worldwide and stopped dead at the US border, not because they failed, but because of paperwork, politics, and a country that decided small, simple, and diesel wasn't worth the hassle. Today we're counting down 10 overbuilt four-wheel drives America never got a shot at, one of which won't be legal here until 2043. Let's start at number 10. Number 10. Fiat Panda. In 1983, Fiat put a manually selectable four-wheel drive system into a hatchback so small you could park two of them nose to tail in a single American parking space, and it still climbed mountains that stopped modern crossovers. The Panda four-wheel drive wasn't badge engineering. Fiat contracted the entire drivetrain out to Steyr-Puch, the Austrian engineering house that had already built the running gear for the original Mercedes-Benz G-Wagen. Instead of a low-range transfer case, Steyr-Puch gave the Panda a driver-selectable four-wheel drive system with an ultra-low first gear, standing in for low range, a trick Fiat kept across all three Panda generations. Designer Giorgetto Giugiaro penned the boxy shape to be as light as possible, and light is exactly what made the four-wheel drive system work with a tiny 965 cubic centimeter engine, putting out less horsepower than a modern riding lawnmower. Europeans have been quietly humiliating bigger, more expensive off-roaders with this thing for 4 decades. Fiat even entered Pandas in the Paris-Dakar Rally. A stock Panda four-wheel drive will outclimb a Ford Bronco Sport in the right conditions, and it does it on a fraction of the fuel and a fraction of the price. America never got the option to find out. The Panda was never engineered or certified to meet US federal motor vehicle safety standards or EPA emissions rules, and Fiat pulled out of the American market entirely in 1983. The exact year the Panda four-wheel drive launched. The timing could not have been worse. Today, importing one legally costs more than the car itself is worth. Freight, customs, and duties on a pair of Pandas shipped from Genoa to Houston have run past $4,000 on top of the roughly $14,000 the cars themselves cost. And as of a few years ago, only 2 Fiat Panda four-wheel drives had ever been listed for sale in the United States on Bring a Trailer, with just one meeting reserve. The vehicle was never engineered or certified to meet US federal motor vehicle safety standards or EPA emissions rules to begin with. Fiat killed the four-wheel drive Panda in 2022 when parts shortages made the Steyr-Puch driveline impossible to keep building, ending a run that had lasted since 1983 across all 3 Panda generations. But the story isn't finished. Fiat's CEO has publicly confirmed the company is actively studying a four-wheel drive version of the new electric Grande Panda. Even if it happens, there's no indication Fiat plans to bring it to American shores, given the brand's US sales collapsed to just 160 vehicles in 2025. Down sharply from the electric 500e's brief bump the year before. Would you daily drive a 48 horsepower Italian hatchback over your truck if it meant never getting stuck again? Say so below. Number 9. UAZ Hunter. Somewhere in Russia right now, a factory is still bolting together a four-wheel drive whose core design dates back to 1971, using a suspension setup, a body structure, and a level of mechanical simplicity that would look right at home in a Cold War motor pool. That vehicle is the UAZ Hunter, and it has never been sold through a single American dealership. Not because nobody wanted it, because Russia's political relationship with the United States made the entire question irrelevant for most of the Hunter's existence. And by the time that changed, US safety and emissions law had moved so far ahead that a body-on-frame truck with leaf springs, no airbags, and a 5-speed manual gearbox from the Brezhnev era simply couldn't clear the bar. The Hunter is the direct descendant of the UAZ 469, a military light utility vehicle built for the Soviet and Warsaw Pact armed forces, and exported to roughly 80 countries. In 2003, UAZ modernized the body, kept the bones, and renamed it Hunter for civilian sale. It is powered by a 2.6-liter four-cylinder, producing a modest 128 horsepower and 150 pound-feet of torque, paired with a 5-speed manual and a locking rear differential. Ground clearance sits at a genuinely useful 210 millimeters, and the entire vehicle is engineered around one priority: staying operable in the coldest, most remote parts of Siberia with minimal outside support. American off-road enthusiast William Anderson tried to change the Hunter's American fate in the early 1990s. After a trip to Russia left him convinced there was a real market for a truck this rugged, he walked away from 2 successful IT companies to found UAZ of America out of Florida, betting that the biggest four-wheel drive market on the planet would embrace a Soviet-designed workhorse. The venture never scaled into anything resembling a real dealer network, and UAZ's political and diplomatic isolation from the American market through most of the Hunter's production history meant the timing never lined up for a serious second attempt. Today, the only legal path onto US roads is the 25-year federal import exemption, and the Hunter itself is still too young to qualify under that rule. Only the older UAZ 469, the Hunter directly descended from, has aged into legality, and even those examples are showing up on American roads, mostly through individual grey market imports, rather than any organized dealer effort, registered state by state as antique or off-road vehicles rather than standard passenger cars. If you wanted the simplest, most repairable four-wheel drive on this entire list, this might be it. Would you trust a Cold War-era Russian gearbox to get you home from a hunting trip? Let us know. Number 8. Peugeot P4. Look at the Peugeot P4 from more than 10 feet away, and you will swear you're looking at a Mercedes-Benz G-Class. That's because you basically are. In the late 1970s, the French military needed to replace 10,000 aging Jeeps, and instead of designing something from scratch, Peugeot struck a 50-50 partnership with Mercedes-Benz to co-produce a militarized version of the brand new G-Wagen. Mercedes supplied the chassis, the body structure, and the four-wheel drive system, engineered by the same Steyr-Puch team behind the Panda four-wheel drive, earlier on this list. Peugeot dropped in its own engine, its own transmission, and handled final assembly at its Sochaux plant. Here's the part that guaranteed Americans would never get one. Mercedes-Benz explicitly restricted Peugeot's export license. The P4 could only be sold to the French military itself and to African nations bound to France by formal defense agreements. Even a civilian version Peugeot offered to the public went nowhere, held back by a high price and a weak power-to-weight ratio compared to the diesel-hungry alternatives already on French roads. The French army ultimately ordered over 13,000 P4s, both gasoline and diesel, and production later shifted to Panhard, which kept building them into the 2000s. The P4 has quietly outlived its own planned replacement program more than once. It served through decades of French military operations, got donated in batches to allied African forces, including Cameroon in 2016, as part of counterterrorism cooperation, and as recently as 2022, was spotted delivered to the front lines of the war in Ukraine, still running the same basic Mercedes underpinnings developed nearly half a century earlier. Number 7. Isuzu Bighorn Turbo Diesel. Americans actually bought this truck. They just never got the engine that made it worth owning. Isuzu sold a version of this exact platform in the United States from 1984 to 2002 under the name Trooper, and it sold reasonably well as a gasoline-only body-on-frame SUV. But in Japan, where the same vehicle wore the name Bighorn, Isuzu offered something American buyers never saw on a spec sheet: a genuine turbocharged diesel inline-4, the 4JX 13.0-liter, built for the kind of low-end torque that gasoline engines of the era simply couldn't match off-road. The US market Trooper never got a diesel option at any point in its 18-year run. This wasn't an oversight. American emissions regulations of the 1990s were brutal on diesel passenger vehicles, and Isuzu made the business call to keep the Bighorn's oil-burning heart a Japan and export market exclusive, rather than fight federal certification for a niche engine in a shrinking American SUV segment. The diesel Bighorn built a reputation across Japan, Australia, and parts of Southeast Asia as the version serious overlanders actually wanted, prized for the kind of fuel range and low rev pulling power that made it a genuine competitor to the diesel Land Cruisers of the same era. Meanwhile, American Trooper buyers cycled through a succession of thirstier gasoline V6 options over the years. 2.8 litre, then 3.2 litre, then finally a 3.5 litre by the end of the run, and never once got the diesel that built the nameplate's reputation everywhere else in the world. Because the Trooper and Bighorn share a badge history, but not a full spec sheet, most Americans don't even realize there's a version of their own truck they never got the option to buy. It's an easy mistake to make, since the two nameplates ride on the same second-generation platform and look nearly identical from the outside, right down to the boxy proportions and stacked headlight arrangement that define the design across both markets. The difference only becomes obvious once you pop the hood and find a 3.0-litre turbo diesel, inline 4, instead of the 3.2-litre gasoline V6 American buyers were stuck choosing between. Isuzu quietly exited the US passenger vehicle market entirely in 2009, closing the door for good on any chance of a late-life diesel Trooper reaching American showrooms. If you want the diesel Bighorn today, your only realistic path is a JDM import, old enough to clear the 25-year federal exemption, and even those are getting harder to find in clean to low-rust condition, since most surviving examples stayed in daily service across Japan, Australia, and Southeast Asia, rather than getting parked in collections. Did you know your neighbor's old Trooper had a stronger sibling you were never offered? Comment if this one surprised you. Number 6. Lada Niva. The Lada Niva has been in continuous production, in essentially its original form, since 1977. That alone should have made it a cult classic on American soil, the way the Land Rover Defender became. Instead, most Americans have never seen one in person. The Niva was the world's first mass-produced off-roader, built with a unibody instead of a body-on-frame chassis, a design choice so ahead of its time that it effectively predicted the modern crossover SUV decades before. Automakers figured out unibody construction could handle real off-road abuse. Under the boxy little wagon body sits a genuine four-wheel drive system with high and low range and a locking center differential, borrowed straight from the Fiat 124-based Lada sedan for its engine. The Niva was never officially sold new in the United States. It was, briefly and strangely, sold in Canada during the 1980s under trim names like the Lada Cossack in the UK and Lada Tiger in Austria, proving the vehicle itself was perfectly capable of reaching North American shores when a government allowed it. The US simply never did. Cold War politics played a role early on, but the deeper problem was persistent. By the time diplomatic relations eased, the Niva still couldn't meet American safety or emission standards, and no importer ever found it profitable enough to push through federal certification for a car that, even in Russia, sold for a fraction of what a comparable American SUV cost. By 2022, AvtoVaz's own press office put total Niva production at nearly 2.5 million vehicles across 45 years, with roughly 700,000 of those exported to more than 100 countries. And after the original Land Rover and its successor, the Defender, were both discontinued in 2016, the Niva became the longest continuously produced off-road vehicle still built in anything close to its original form. Lada's designers reportedly described the concept internally as a Renault 5 put onto a Land Rover chassis. which is a remarkably accurate summary of a car that combines hatchback-sized dimensions with genuinely serious four-wheel drive hardware. A fully redesigned Niva Sport recently launched in Europe for under $20,000, complete with a more powerful 1.6-liter 16 valve engine, putting out 122 horsepower, heated seats, electric mirrors, and air conditioning, none of which existed on the earliest 1977 trucks. Americans still can't buy it, and there's currently no importer working to change that. The only legal route in remains a 25-year exempt grey market import, hunted down individually by a small but devoted community of enthusiasts who imported theirs years before. Internet car culture made obscure Cold War off-roaders trendy. Would a $20,000 Niva Sport have any real chance against a Wrangler if Lada ever got the certification paperwork done? Sound off below. Number 5. Steyr-Puch Pinzgauer 710M. The United States Army actually bought a handful of these, just not this exact model. In the early 1990s, Delta Force quietly purchased 20 turbo diesel Pinzgauer 718M 6-wheel drive trucks, a later larger sibling of the 4-wheel drive 710M featured here, drawn by a chassis design so capable it's still considered ahead of some modern military platforms. That's the closest any Pinzgauer ever came to an official American footprint, and it happened entirely outside civilian reach. Steyr-Puch, the same Austrian engineering house responsible for the Panda 4-wheel drive's drivetrain, and the G-Class underpinnings hiding inside the Peugeot P4, earlier on this list, developed the Pinzgauer family in the late 1960s as a successor to their smaller Haflinger, with the 710M 4-wheel drive model. This entry focuses on entering production first, in 1971. What made the Pinzgauer genuinely unusual was its central backbone chassis, with fully enclosed driveshafts, an independent portal axle suspension, a layout that let it clear obstacles most conventional live-axle trucks would simply get hung up on. Power came from a 2.5-liter, air-cooled inline-4 mounted low in the chassis, later supplemented by Volkswagen turbodiesel options. Armies across Austria, New Zealand, Argentina, the UK, Saudi Arabia, and dozens of other nations bought in over an 18,000-unit first-generation production run between 1971 and 1985. It served through the Gulf War and the Iraq War in US hands, before being quietly decommissioned during the Obama administration. Steyr never established a commercial dealer network in the United States, and no civilian version was ever certified for American roads at any point across the Pinzgauer's 36-year production run, which stretched all the way to 2007 for later 6-wheel variants. Every Pinzgauer on US soil today arrived either through that tiny military purchase, a private grey market import brought in individually by collectors, or an unusual case like the Navajo Nation's fleet, which still runs Pinzgauers for tribal services and guided off-road tours through Canyon de Chelly National Monument, using the truck's original troop carrier configuration to haul tourists across terrain few conventional vehicles could handle. Surviving military surplus examples do occasionally surface on the classic vehicle market, typically priced between $18,000 and just under $50,000 depending on condition. That's the entire American story of one of the most capable military trucks ever engineered, a handful of Delta Force units, a National Park Tour fleet, and a scattering of private collectors filling in the gaps Steyr never bothered to. Should the Pentagon have shared this one with the rest of us? Let us know what you do with one. Number 4. Suzuki Jimny JB74. This is the 4-wheel drive American buyers ask for more than almost any other vehicle on the internet, and it will not be legal to import until the year 2043. Suzuki has built the Jimny in some form since 1970, making it the longest continuously produced small off-roader in the world. Americans briefly got a version of it. From 1985 through 1995, Suzuki federalized the Jimny under the name Samurai, using the SJ413 chassis and a 1.3-liter engine, and it sold well right up until Consumer Reports published a rollover risk report in 1988 that gutted demand almost overnight. Suzuki pulled the model in 1995 and has never federalized a single Jimny generation since. The current JB74 generation launched in 2018 to worldwide acclaim, built on a genuine body-on-frame Lada chassis, with solid axles front and rear and a proper low-range transfer case, wrapped in retro styling that looks like a shrunken Land Cruiser 70 series. Coincidentally, the truck sitting at number 1 on this list. It is sold in over 100 countries. It is not sold here for 2 separate reasons stacked on top of each other. First, Suzuki stopped selling cars in the United States entirely in 2012, walking away from the American passenger vehicle market for good. Second, even if Suzuki wanted back in, the JB74 was never engineered to meet American side impact crash standards or corporate average fuel economy requirements, and estimates put the cost of federalizing it at roughly $275 million for a vehicle that would sell in relatively small numbers. The only legal path onto US roads is the 25-year federal import exemption, which means a 2018 model JB74 doesn't become eligible until the year 2043. Fans wanting a Jimny today are stuck importing older JB23 and JB43 generations from the late 1990s and early 2000s instead, which are already US legal but lack the current model's refinement, safety equipment, and updated 4-cylinder engine. Even those older imports aren't cheap or simple, requiring a broker familiar with JDM titling, state-by-state emissions exemptions, and left-hand drive conversion work that can add thousands to the total cost. Canada's shorter 15-year import rule already allows JB64 and JB74 imports starting in 2033, a full decade before American buyers get the same option, which has created an odd pipeline of Canadian-registered Jimnys parked tantalizingly close to the border while US owners wait out the clock. Suzuki's official position hasn't wavered either. With no US dealer network left, and a $275 million estimated cost to federalize a low-volume model, there's essentially no business case for Suzuki to revisit the decision, regulatory hurdles aside. Would you actually wait until 2043 for one, or import an older generation now and deal with the compromises? Tell us in the comments. Number 3. Toyota Mega Cruiser. Toyota built a direct answer to the Hummer H1, and almost nobody in America ever saw one. The Mega Cruiser was developed from a Japanese military platform called the BXD-10, and when Toyota turned it into a civilian vehicle in 1996 under the internal code BXD-20, they kept nearly everything that made the military version brutal: portal axles, locking differentials on both ends, and a genuinely rare 4-wheel steering system that let this enormous truck turn in a surprisingly tight radius, despite stretching over 200 inches long and standing more than 6.5 feet tall. At a curb weight approaching 6,300 pounds, it remains one of the largest production 4-wheel drives Toyota has ever built. Toyota sold it exclusively in Japan, and even there, almost nobody could afford one. High purchase taxes, and the Mega Cruiser's sheer size, which made it genuinely difficult to navigate narrow Japanese city streets, kept civilian sales to just 133 units across the entire 6-year production run, sold between 1996 and 2001. Thousands more were built for the Japanese military, and once decommissioned, most were reportedly destroyed rather than released to the public. Toyota never marketed the Mega Cruiser outside Japan, and it was never engineered or certified for American roads at any point. That scarcity turned the Mega Cruiser into one of the most collectible Toyotas on the planet. a factory high roof example, one of fewer than 150 ever built in that configuration, sold on Bring a Trailer for $167,500 in 2024. And other standard roof examples have been bid past $100,000 without meeting reserve. Interior amenities were surprisingly upscale for a military-derived truck, with early buyers able to option a car phone, a screen visible from every seating position, and what appears to be genuine leather and wood trim, a strange contrast against the portal axles and dual locking differentials underneath. Because civilian production first began in late 1995, the earliest mega cruisers cleared America's 25-year import threshold back in 2020, and a slow trickle of grey market examples, some arriving from as far away as Kazakhstan, have started showing up stateside with left-hand drive. Number 2. Nissan Patrol Y61/T D42. In parts of the world, this is the truck people cross-shop against the Land Cruiser. In America, it was never offered under its own name at all. The Nissan Patrol has run continuously since 1951 across 6 generations, and the Y61, launched in 1997, is widely considered the enthusiast benchmark. Solid axles front and rear, coil springs, and part-time four-wheel drive at a production stage when most rivals had already moved to independent suspension for comfort. Nissan offered the broadest engine lineup of any Patrol generation on the Y61, including the TD42 T-Turbo Diesel inline-6 Overlanders, specifically seek out for its long-haul durability, alongside the common rail ZD30 D DTI diesel and a range of gasoline 6s up to the tuner favorite TB48. Nissan made a deliberate business decision to keep the Patrol out of America. Rather than update the solid axle, body-on-frame Patrol to meet US safety and emission standards, Nissan chose to position its full-size SUV ambitions under the Infiniti luxury brand instead, and later folded the nameplate into the Nissan Armada domestically. The Y61 sold across Australia, the Middle East, and Africa for over a quarter century, remarkably barely changed from its 1997 launch, and remains in production today in some regional markets under the name Patrol Safari, specifically to distinguish it from the unrelated, independent suspension Y62 sold in America as the Armada. The Patrol built its reputation in the harshest environments on Earth, from Australian outback expeditions to Middle Eastern desert rallying, and TD42 diesel Patrols are frequently cross-shopped directly against 80 series Land Cruisers by overlanders who consider the two trucks equally capable, with some arguing the Nissan's live front axle and simpler mechanicals actually make it the easier truck to keep running in the middle of nowhere. In Japan, the Y60 and Y61 wore the Nissan Safari badge instead, sharing the same chassis and drivetrain options under a different name entirely, which occasionally confuses American buyers researching import options who don't realize Safari and Patrol are the same truck. The only legal path into the US today is the 25-year federal import exemption, which is just now opening up early Y61 production years, with 2000 through 2003 model year trucks becoming eligible between 2025 and 2028. American enthusiasts have been importing the older, mechanically simpler Y60 generation for years already, while waiting for Y61s to age into eligibility, and clean TD42T equipped Y61 wagons are already being cross-shopped in import circles against 80 series Land Cruisers on price and capability alike. Number 1. Toyota Land Cruiser 70 Series. This truck has been in continuous production since November 1984. It is still sold brand new today, and Toyota has never once offered Americans the chance to buy it. When the FJ40 Land Cruiser ended production, Toyota split the Land Cruiser lineage in two directions. American buyers got the 4-door FJ60 wagon, which gradually evolved into the plush, 3-row 200 and 300 series luxury trucks sold today. The rest of the world got the 70 series, the direct spiritual successor to the FJ40, stripped down, mechanically simple, and engineered purely to survive punishing conditions in Africa, the Middle East, Australia, and Latin America with minimal support infrastructure. Toyota's official reasoning in the 1980s was that the 70 series wasn't premium enough or large enough for American tastes at the time, a decision that looks almost comedic given the current market's appetite for exactly this kind of stripped-down utility. But the real barrier has always been regulatory. The 70 series has never been engineered or certified to meet US Federal Motor Vehicle Safety Standards, or EPA emissions requirements, and because it remains in continuous production today, the 25-year import exemption that lets enthusiasts bring in other forbidden classics can never catch up to it. Every single 70 series ever built, from the earliest 1984 trucks to the one rolling off the line in the Middle East this year, remains permanently locked out. Demand has been so intense in export markets that Australian dealers reported a 2.5-year backorder at one point, and you can still walk into a Toyota showroom in the UAE today and drive home a brand new 79 series pickup or 76 series wagon for around $38,600, built with the same basic mechanical simplicity, solid axles, and diesel torque that defined the truck back in 1984. Toyota has resisted piling on the electronics and infotainment complexity that define its American market SUVs, keeping the 70 series deliberately old school for buyers who need it to survive remote terrain with minimal support. Meanwhile, American enthusiasts are left importing decades-old soft-top examples that occasionally sell for as much as $35,000, despite being older than the person buying them, since the truck's continuous production run means the 25-year exemption clock can genuinely never catch up to whatever model year is currently rolling off Toyota's line. Every single 70 series in the United States today arrived through private grey market channels, and clean, rust-free left-hand drive examples remain some of the hardest Toyota imports to find. 40 years in continuous production, sold everywhere Toyota does business except one country. If Toyota finally brought the 70 series to America tomorrow, would it outsell the entire rest of the Land Cruiser lineup? Tell us why in the comments. 10 vehicles, 10 different reasons America said no. Emissions rules, licensing restrictions, or a market that decided a simple truck wasn't worth selling here. If you had to pick just one to import today, which one are you fighting the DMV for? Drop it below, and subscribe for more forbidden 4x4s.